Welcome back to a new episode of Wheels of History. Before we dive into today's story, we invite you to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more videos like this one. For you, it's just a small gesture, but for us, it's essential to keep sharing stories of people and machines that have left their mark on an era. Today we're talking about an artist who put his talent at the service of motorcycling. Today we're talking about Lino Tonti. If we had to choose a Leonardo among the creators of 20th century motorcycling, Lino Tonti's name would surface without hesitation. In each of his creations pulses something that goes beyond engineering. There's the mark of genius, the gesture of an artist, the insight that becomes both form and substance. Today, projects are born in the pixels of a screen, calculated to the thousandth, perfect in numbers and function, but often they lack breath. That spark of soul that turns utility into beauty, metal into passion. It's as if spirit itself has been sacrificed, deliberately excluded in the name of efficiency. But a motorcycle, if it doesn't have something alive inside, is just an appliance. Cold as a refrigerator, anonymous as a hairdryer, predictable as a toaster. Tonti's creations, on the other hand, vibrate with a different energy. There's something in them that escapes strict logic, something that invites contemplation. Just one glance at the Bianchi twin-cylinder Grand Prix bike from the early 60s is enough to understand we're not looking at a mere machine, it's an engineering apotheosis. And what about the 1971 Moto Guzzi Sport? That frontal V-twin, almost a talisman set into a frame that seems drawn by a goldsmith. That's why we call Tonti an artist. Because only someone who knows the language of beauty can solve the toughest technical puzzles with such grace. Like a painter with a canvas, a sculptor with marble, a poet with verse. In the immortal works of architecture, true beauty is never just skin deep. It's structure, hidden tension, balance achieved at the cost of a silent struggle against gravity. Look into the guts of a cathedral, into the heart of its scaffolding. You'll discover a world of secret geometries, an invisible harmony made of forces that cancel each other out and hold each other up. A silent pact between genius and matter. The same happens in a motorcycle. There's a skeleton you can't see, but that supports the entire poem. And if in Brunelleschi's dome the magnificence rests on a silent dance of chains, arches and counterweights in the Assotta Fraschini, and even more in a Moto Guzzi designed by Tonti, it's the union between engine, frame and proportions that creates a harmony which doesn't impose itself but reveals itself little by little to those who know how to observe. The motorcycle is a barer, more honest art form. It cannot hide its nerves, its vital organs, its intentions. Everything is there, exposed, vibrant. And when the artist is as complete as Tonti, every component speaks the language of the whole. There is no dissonance. Mechanics becomes gesture. Geometry becomes character. Metal is colored by soul. It is said, and in some circles it's passed down with the reverence of legend, that Tonti drew the frame of the V7 Sport in chalk directly on the floor of the Guzzi experimental department. A moment of inspiration traced freehand like a dowser searching for a water vein. When asked about it, he would respond with an ironic, almost annoyed smirk. Maybe it happened, maybe not, and it was just a quick way to explain something to someone who didn't get it. But those who have eyes to see and a heart to feel know that in that gesture lay everything. The immediacy of genius, the confidence of someone unafraid of imperfection, because he knows that true beauty is not born from calculation, but from an inner vision no machine can replicate. Of course, even in the clearest sky there are shadows, and Lino Tonti's design firmament is not without its eclipses. Not everything that bore his signature shone with the same intensity. The Nuovo Falcone, created in 1971 at the request of Moto Guzzi, struggles to enter the pantheon of his masterpieces. Solid, yes, but lacking that spark that transforms the necessary into the memorable. The experimental twin-cylinder Gilera of 1967-68. Ambitious, no doubt. But it ended up on the margins of history, like a sketch that never found its breath. And the Bianchi MT61, designed for military use. A rational multitasking machine, but not up to the needs of an army that, though still anchored to the concept of the Super-Alce, was demanding an evolutionary step that never came. It must be said, and said firmly, that these works were children of constraint, born from external directives and design limitations imposed from above. These were motorcycles built on request, within tight margins, with imagination bound and creativity walled up in a cell with no windows. And Tonti, a man born free in mind before in hand, could not shine under chains. But when he was allowed to dance within his own creative space, when the watchword was to race, not conform, to win, not merely function, then his genius came fully to life. Just look at the Bianchi twin-cylinder Grand Prix machines. In them, every component screams speed and style. Or consider the refined care he gave to Peyton, both in its more ambitious versions and in those built on tight budgets. In both cases, technical elegance and performance spoke the same language. Even more impressive was his ability to create jewels from already existing parts, turning what others saw as mere scrap into mechanical treasure. The Linto twin cylinders, using Ermaki top ends, are the very emblem of alchemical transmutation, from humble material to noble result. And then there is perhaps the most emblematic work of his approach, the V7 Sport, to take a touring base and sculpt it, stroke by stroke of genius, into a pure, streamlined, essential sports bike. That's a feat worthy of a Homer of mechanics. From that foundation would later emerge the Le Mans First, muscular and proud, a charging bison with the heart of a lion and the sinews of a feline. In all this, Tonti always gave far more than the raw material would have suggested. He built temples where others would have seen only bricks. It becomes natural then to turn our gaze to the man behind the genius, because a design doesn't arise from nothing and talent doesn't float suspended in space. It has roots, stories, stages, battles won and lost, hands dirty with oil and eyes filled with visions. Tonti never posed as a master, but he was one. He didn't seek disciples, yet they came to him anyway, drawn by that rare combination of rigor and lightness. He could disassemble a motorcycle like a surgeon unravels a fate, yet he could also describe it with the disarming simplicity of someone who treats excellence as something natural. Lino Tonti was born in Cattolica on September 16, 1920, with the Adriatic Sea just steps away and the wind of ingenuity already blowing through his hair. He had a memory like steel and never forgot. Wednesday, September 22, 1937, mark it down, was the day he crossed the threshold of the Benelli Technical Office in Pesaro and began writing the first chapter of a story destined to leave a deep mark. He worked directly under Giuseppe Benelli, a charismatic and volcanic figure. His first assignment was as technical drafter for the Barbero 175, a design that would evolve into the famous 250, a motorcycle that would conquer the Tourist Trophy and, with Dario Ambrosini in the saddle, win a world championship in 1950. Not bad for an apprentice's debut. He remained at Benelli until January 1941, when he was drafted into the Aeronautical Engineering Corps. It was wartime, and the young Tonti didn't waste time. He set to work among aircraft engines and fuselages, learning the art of lightness and strength, knowledge he would later translate into chassis geometries. It was right there, among stringers and steel molybdenum tubular structures, that he developed his talent for frame design, a talent that would set a standard. At the end of the war, while Italy was rising from the rubble, Tonti dedicated himself to transforming military motorcycles into racing machines. The single-cylinder Triumph 350, with its pushrods and rockers, became his laboratory. He installed aviation-derived valves and turned it into a racing bike. Enzo Mollari and Benito Mariani raced on those machines until competition and time forced them to turn the page. In those years, there was a hunger for invention that gave no rest. Tonti bought the mount of a German cannon made of duralumin, and with a brilliance bordering on the mystical, turned it into a drafting table on which to draw his future visions. It's the central scene of a neo-realist film, but it's all true. Genius clawed its way forward, carving out possibility in the poverty of the post-war years. The creative fire was already burning in the aftermath of the war. In 1947, from leftover war materials turned into dreams, Tonti built the Linto 75, a twin-cam single-cylinder born to bite into the curves of the street races along the Romagna Riviera. Shortly after, that same visionary spirit led him to design the Lintosigno 125, a high-wheeled scooter presented in Rimini in 1950. It wasn't just mobility, it was style, intuition, the future. Ermaki saw its value and purchased the project, welcoming Tonti into its motorcycle division in Varese. Thus began a new phase, technical, industrial, and profoundly Italian. In the years 1949-1950, he worked on a small, high-wheeled scooter, the Makino 125, which brought him to Varese. It was an idea ahead of its time, like so many of his. But it was in 1956 that he accomplished one of his most iconic feats, the 75cc record-setting motorcycle, an aerodynamic torpedo in which every millimeter was designed to challenge the air. With Massimo Pasolini at the controls and the collaboration of Alcide Biotti, the missile flew down the Lainate-Castellanza highway at 167.208 kilometers per h, a figure which, when spoken slowly, still seems impossible for such a modest displacement. In the meantime, as early as 1953, Tonti was already experimenting with visionary ideas. He designed a large scooter with a horizontal engine, a kind of spiritual prototype of the future BMW K series, though, as he liked to point out with that sharp modesty of his, more modern. Tonti, with a spark of pride flickering between moustache and memory, recalled 1957 as the year he walked into the racing department of Mondial. He had been called in to bring shape to a twin-cylinder 250, a refined creature born under the sign of speed. But fate had it that in that very season, Mondial, Gilera and Moto Guzzi all announced the end of their official racing programs, a collective farewell that left the machine unfinished, like a symphony suspended at its final note. But fate was not unkind. In that dream-filled workshop, Tonti met Giuseppe Pattoni, a grounded man, a mechanic assigned to a certain Cecil Sanford, who in that same year clinched the World Championship in the 250 class. From that meeting was born a deep partnership, more akin to an alchemical pact than a simple professional collaboration. It was the beginning of the Mondial Patton adventure, later simply Peyton, fire and precision, heart and geometry. The first to take shape were the twin-cam 125S and 175S, small, precise, as sharp as stilettos. Among those who raced them were Silvano Rinaldi, and even a young Mike Hailwood, destined to become a legend. Then came the twin-cylinder bikes, 250, 350, up to 500. Masterworks shaped with obsessive care, capable of thrilling both rider and onlooker. Today, those machines are relics, rare gems in the hands of the most refined collectors. But Tonti, with a restless and curious spirit, didn't stay for the whole journey. In 1958, he was called by Bianchi, not for one project, but for 100. He had to design street bikes and machines for mud and battle, from the clean lines of the Tonale 175 to the 175 and 250 single cylinders intended for motocross. And then there was the Bianchi 318, as solid as a mule and as versatile as a Swiss Army knife, with which he won the military competition and launched a large-scale production destined for army units. And yet, among all his creations, the pinnacle of his artistry was reached with the twin-cylinder Grand Prix bikes, 250, 350, then 500. Machines we would now call functional works of art, built with the patience of a goldsmith and the instinct of a genius. They were ridden by illustrious names, Mussio, Perfers, Tino Brambilla, Grassetti, Venturi, but also knights from across the channel like Derek Minter, Alistair King, and the flamboyant Bob McIntyre. He created a twin-cam single-cylinder motocross bike in 250, 350 and later 400cc versions, winner of 2 Italian championships and nicknamed Raspatera, Earth Scraper. He also designed 2 GP prototypes, 175 and 250cc, used in Locarno and later in Venezuela, where they competed successfully. The 250 had a bore stroke ratio of 0.69, a futuristic figure for the time. But the 350cc Bianchi twin-cylinder GP bike was his masterpiece. Equipped with a twin camshaft distribution and a 2-piece frame nicknamed the Bikini, it delivered around 50 horsepower at over 10,000 revolutions per minute. Versions of 386 and 454cc followed, reaching up to 70 horsepower. They won 2 Italian championships and performed admirably in the World Championship. Among his other creations for Bianchi were the military MT-61 and the sporty Silla 175 Grand Sport built on the base of the Bernina 125. Under Tonti's guidance, Bianchi won 2 Italian titles in the 500 class in 1961 with Brambilla and in 1964 with Venturi. In the World Championship, they reached as high as 5th place in the 350 class with McIntyre and Grassetti. Yet what had once been the oldest of all Italian motorcycle manufacturers, the forge that had produced bicycles, cars, and legendary motorcycles, soon faded into oblivion. Oldest, yes, but less celebrated than other brands that survived with fewer merits and greater luck. But fate waits for no one. And while Bianchi, glorious and silent, lowers its shutters for good, Tonti, restless spirit and builder by vocation, finds a new harbour, Arcor, at Galera. It's 1964, and the brand, though still prestigious, is now shrouded in an aura of industrial melancholy. Galera wants him for the development of mid to large twin cylinders suited to a changing market. They need a motorcycle that is accessible, yes, but also modern and appealing. The task is not simple. The Galera twin cylinder, conceived to redeem the lackluster performance of the 1950s B300, struggles to be born. Too many compromises, too many chains around creativity's ankles. The result does not live up to the name, and the project dissolves among paperwork and track tests, never finding its way to final production. At Galera, Tonti senses that times are changing. The motorcycle will no longer be just a working tool, but an object of desire. Thus, the Galera 124 5V is born, sporty, modern, responsive, an immediate success. But his real bet was the B.500, an ambitious twin-cylinder inspired by the legendary Saturno. The project founded amid corporate indecision and disillusioned, Tonti broke ties with Galera. It was then that with Umberto Premoli he rekindled the Linto flame and laid the foundation for his last great independent challenge, the Linto 500 GP. The call of competition was too strong. Speed was still a muse visiting him in his sleep. And so, using Aermacchi parts and his own vision, he built the Linto 500, a twin-cylinder machine that broke with the past and burst into a racing scene dominated by Agostini and his MV Agusta. The champion's dominance seemed untouchable, but Tonti had no illusions of total conquest. What mattered to him was breaking the stagnation, proving that something new, Italian and independent, could still put up a fight. Alberto Pagani, a racer by blood and a refined rider, was the right man to push it to the limit. The Linto amazed, battled and won. In 1969 it triumphed at the nation's Grand Prix in Imola, leaving behind a mechanical roar that sounded like a rebellion. And though production remained limited, the requests poured in. The bike was loved. It had soul, character, a hunger for the road that the British singles could no longer satisfy. Among the riders who chose it, one stood out. Hungarian Gyula Marszalski, a pure talent who in 1969 managed to finish the 500 World Championship in second place, right behind the untouchable Agostini. It was the peak of a short but intense parabola, one that still burns in the hearts of those who believe that art and ingenuity alone could change the world. In 1967, Lino Tonti walked through the gates of Mandello del Lario with quiet steps, but a mind ablaze. It was the beginning of a long and fruitful alliance with Moto Guzzi, which at the time was still under the control of SEIM, a technical, passionate management made of men rather than numbers. A reality which, though brief, allowed Tonti to express himself with the kind of freedom that was vital to him. A freedom that, like all rare things, would soon be extinguished under the more industrial and less visionary leadership of the De Tomaso era beginning in 1973. When SEIM called him in 1967, Tonti inherited the desk that had belonged to Carcano, a key figure in Moto Guzzi's history, just ousted by a management grappling with an identity crisis. With clarity and vision, Tonti knew a symbol was needed. So he took the calm and composed V7 and shaped it into a fast touring weapon, the V7 Sport. The first prototypes roared in Monza and erased all doubts. 19 world records shattered between June and October of 1969. But fate tried to halt the revolution. Union strikes brought everything to a standstill. Tonti, however, was not one to wait for orders. One night he loaded the frame and engine onto a truck and took them to his basement at home, where the legend came back to life. There, the definitive V7 Sport was born, the spiritual mother of all modern Moto Guzzis. It was produced in 150 units with a red-painted chromium molybdenum tubular frame. The engine, pushrod and rocker arm valve train, two valves inclined at 70 degrees, delivered 52 horsepower at 6,300 revolutions per minute from a 748cc displacement, paired with a new 5-speed gearbox. A legend had been born, a slim, muscular motorcycle, conceived for the road but with a racetrack heart. It was the seed from which the Le Mans would sprout, the lineage of rebellious bulls, a powerful and untamed breed that would challenge Europe on endurance circuits. The Italian 500 kilometers, the Bol d'Or in France, and the mythical 200 miles of Imola in 1972, with Vittorio Brambilla, Guido Mandracci and Jack Findlay taming the brutal power of the Guzis. But before that, the fire was already burning. Alongside engineer Michele Bianchi, a technician with a racer's heart, and with the collaboration of historic figures like Abramo Rollo, Umberto Todero and Ermelini, Tonti began weaving his mechanical tapestry. Even the skeptical general manager, Romolo De Stefani, initially doubtful, eventually yielded to the charm of the engineer from Cattolica's projects. It was the golden era. The technical foundation was so solid, so inspired, that even today private tuners in Italy, in Germany, in Australia still extract power and glory from those V7 engines, pushing them beyond 1000 cc, making them roar in BOT, Battle of Twins races and historical competitions. Then came De Tomaso. The horizons changed, the company shifted direction, the pace became less inspired, more imposed. Yet Tonti did not yield. He continued to create, refine and imagine. From his pencil came projects that defied convention. The 254 four-cylinder and original 250cc with a single overhead camshaft, elegant and compact, and then the I-Convert, a 1000cc machine with a torque converter and automatic transmission, a bold technical leap ahead of its time, anticipating modern solutions. Tonti would remain at Guzzi for many years, first in Mandello, then in Modena, like a mechanical philosopher observing the world from behind a drafting table. But we, who followed him through the switchbacks of history and the workshops of intuition, know well that it isn't true. Lino Tonti crossed the 20th century like a bridge between two worlds, that of the craftsman with dirty hands and that of the engineers with minds full of algorithms. But he, with the humility of the great and the audacity of visionaries, built something that no CAD will ever be able to draw, the soul of the motorcycle. And today, years later, every time we start an engine that vibrates like a heart, every time a curve pulls a primal smile from us, every time we feel beauty turn into speed, it's as if Lino was still there, hunched over the drawing board, sketching another line toward infinity, because a true artist never stops creating, not even after the last bend. Lino Tonti passed away on July 13, 2002, in silence as he had lived, without fanfare, but leaving behind an echo that still resonates in garages, on racetracks, in the dreams of those who see in the motorcycle something more than two wheels and an engine. Tonti is no longer here, but his hand remains, impressed like a seal on every motorcycle he created. His spirit is nestled in the ribs of the frames, in the curves of the exhausts, in the geometry of machines that never age, because they were born eternal. And perhaps this, in the end, is the destiny of true artists, to vanish in time but remain in form.